We recently completed the main story of DLC4, Krieg, the Psycho, and the Fantastic Fustercluck, and we'd like to share some of our thoughts about it. The TLDW of the video is we think the story was phenomenal and handled in such a perfect manner, we'd rate it 5 out of 5 pangolins, easy. Our expectations were set so high we assumed there would be little chance to really impress us since we already had a few ideas of how we wanted this story to go. We were so wrong. In a good way, though. Here's the premise of the DLC. The basic premise is that Krieg and Maya have a past from Borderlands 2. They were playable characters, but also developed a very close attraction to one another, mainly after Krieg saved her life on their first encounter on Pandora, and she realized that there was something a little bit different about him. We fast forward to Borderlands 3 and we see Maya get killed and immediately know that Krieg will be affected by it. The goal of the DLC is not just to explore how he handles the death of a loved one, but also to find out what happened to Krieg to get him to his current state. Okay, that said, here is where the DLC picks up the story. Here's the basic summary of the story. We start by getting a mission from Tannis, as she is curious to find out why all the psychos seem to transform in similar ways. Luckily for us, Krieg volunteers to help out. The next step is for us to teleport into Krieg's mind, where we see all sorts of things floating in the air. You see random skeletons and chunks of meat. It's just an overall crazy place to be. Imagine a Salvador Dali painting, but gross. We're greeted by a giant version of Krieg and an initial attack until eventually we get through that and then we can enter a door where we meet both versions of Krieg, his sane side and his psycho side. Throughout the story, we see both Kriegs constantly bantering back and forth in a married couple sort of way. Their bond is easily conveyed through their dialogue as well as their actions when on screen together. Both are trying to coexist with each other, it's just not as easy for the Psycho Krieg to express this. So we're constantly trying to interpret his jumbled sentences and a basically foreign language. Gearbox definitely put effort into making this language more intelligible than previous iterations to facilitate the storytelling. We think it worked very well. It was really obvious usually what he was referring to, and it felt great not to have everything translated by the sane Krieg. There was exposition delivered, as with any story, but they did it in a non-intrusive and exceptionally smooth way. We're constantly reminded of just how crazy Krieg's mind is by the environment and some insane tasks we are forced to complete. For instance, there are chunks of meat and body parts everywhere. There are random eyeballs that follow you, even in photo mode. We got some monster skull thing to look cross-eyed, it was pretty funny. And also, one point in the DLC, you shoot down the moon. Yeah, I mean that's kind of what you expect, but not really. This is exactly the kind of things that we wanted but just didn't know. These features are what make the environment so immersive. You definitely feel like you are in a world that has its own rules. As we go through the DLC, we start to see that Psycho Krieg has manifestations of his negative thoughts and emotions. We end up fighting evil versions of well-known and loved characters, namely Brick, Mordecai, and Lilith. Psycho Krieg is misremembering a lot of previous interactions because he seems to be stuck having to deal with the negative emotions for both of them, and we see that throughout the entire DLC. Eventually, we end up defeating the source of their transformation, and in a symbolic gesture, both Kriegs end up helping you defeat the final boss, which represents the darkness in Krieg. Finally, the story wraps up in a very beautiful and touching way. Both Kriegs end up forming a symbiotic relationship during the DLC that is solidified as we learn the Psycho Krieg was trying to stop Sane Krieg from having to deal with what he was already going through the entire time. When given the chance to enter the real world from Tannis, Sane Krieg chooses to stay behind due to the Psycho Krieg's actions. In the end, we see both Kriegs morph into one as he is heading towards a home that he has imagined. In this home, Maya is waiting for him. The final theme we are left with is that everyone experiences a major loss at some point, but that is not the end. Grief is a part of life, but you don't have to dwell on it. It's okay to remember loved ones the way you want, and everyone deals with it in their own way. We also see the importance of teamwork in the story. There is no way Krieg could have done this by himself, and he would have eventually succumbed to this transformation. This is just another example of how important story is to some characters in Borderlands. Some are obviously filler, but the ones that they focus on really stand out. So here's our final thoughts on this DLC. We thought this DLC was handled perfectly. We were here for the story, and we're not remotely disappointed, even though it didn't go exactly as we had pictured it. The ending of this DLC definitely got us a little choked up, but it was also a very happy conclusion to the sad story. We wouldn't really call it bittersweet, since it seems Krieg ultimately was rewarded for the pain and turmoil he's had to deal with. We really appreciate the fact Gearbox didn't attempt to bring back Maya somehow, even though it would have been really easy to wave a magic wand and have the environment move the plot into some convenient outcome. This was a love letter to Borderlands 3 fans, and the capstone to an amazing first year for the game. If you're not interested in Krieg's story, this DLC is fairly short and heavily invested in his journey, so you may not enjoy it as much. Maybe we're easily amused, but this DLC blew our socks off, and we really think the story, hands down, is the most interesting of the entire franchise. Yeah, even more than Tiny Tina. So that's our final take on the DLC. We loved it and think the writers should be commended. It was too easy to mess this up with so many fans wanting different outcomes, and they just absolutely killed it. Thanks for watching this video. Links to resources will be in the description. Please consider liking and sharing the video if you enjoyed it. Subscribing to the channel is absolutely free and is the best way to get notifications when we post more content. Thanks again for watching, be well, and happy farming.
Watch 10 gallon go to shred. Alright, maybe not.